stray.
Sure. You want to kick it off?
When you're ready. Henrik, are you
Yeah,
ready?
I'm ready. It's going to be without, but we'll just...
Is everyone's mics on?
Oh, we still have some time.
What time are we supposed to start?
He's told us to start whenever we're ready.
We got 5 minutes for people to come.
Yeah.
Yeah, okay. Right, we're going to get started. Good morning, everybody.
Good morning!
Good morning! Welcome to our panel on putting a hashtag into hard news. Hashtag today for this session is hashtag good journalism. So get out there, get on Twitter, get on Snapchat, wherever you are. Tell us loads of stories that you've got that are doing brilliantly on social media. That is our theme today. My name's Claire. I'm head of journalism at International Media Support. We are a Danish NGO. We work all over the world, trying to amplify the voices of untold stories, marginalised communities, and really work in some very difficult contexts. I'm here with my colleague Henrik, who has, like myself, more than a couple of decades experience in journalism, but also works across the MENA region. And I'm here also with Yusuf from Hashtag Our Stories. Welcome to you all, a warm, warm welcome. Now, what's really poignant about this panel for me is that 10 years ago, I literally wrote the book on social media for journalists. The irony of writing a book on social media was not lost on me then, and it certainly isn't lost on me now. But what was interesting is back then what we needed was a flag in the sand to really encapsulate the shift that had happened. What we realised was there was loads more entrants into the market of doing journalism, lots of different interpretations of who journalists were, but then there was also an explosion in new formats and new ways of doing practice of journalism. And it's really that energy and that innovation and that enthusiasm that we're trying to encapsulate again today. So what we're doing is we're announcing the launch of a database of best practice examples of how to do good, fact-checked, robust, hard journalism on social media. As a way of really kind of trying to help everybody be inspired about what is possible on these new formats, even when these are stories that are extremely sensitive and extremely challenging. As a media development organisation, of course, that's really important to us because we're very serious about improving the effectiveness of our partners in reaching new audiences and telling their stories in creative ways. So we've joined forces with Hashtag for a reason. You can see there's not only a bit of an age gap, but you know, we are open to accept that the journalists like Henrik and myself, who have loads of experience, what we don't know is the possibilities that exist around these platforms, whether that is Twitch, TikTok, Snout, all sorts of different ones in contexts around the globe. We need to really lean on the expertise of young journalists who have this as their day-to-day job. So the database that is available, if you go to the International Media Support website, you'll see it's an Airtable, where what we've done is brought together as a start examples from Asia, from MENA, from Latin America, that we consider to be really great examples and inspiring ways of doing journalism through social media. So it's very much a call to action today. We want to hear from you as well. We want to know what you think is good journalism done on social media, and we want that to grow. We want local custodians around the globe to really try and make this a living resource so that we can all help each other reach new audiences. So the main question for us and what we need to learn and explore today is how can we do really great, hard news in serious journalism, but do it embracing these novel formats? How can we push the boundaries of doing good journalism? And how can we document human rights abuses, challenges, etc. around us, but do it in a way that is meaningful? So there's a few examples that are scrolling here behind me, but just a few examples from our own media partners. We've got Dahaj, for example, in Lebanon, who's experimented with an interactive timeline explaining how the Beirut port has been bombed historically. Wapatoa, who's done a great infographic all around air pollution. Hiba, really excellent example of how to take a really complex story and turn that into quite an easy to understand narrative using animated video, explaining the implications of microloans in the community. Madamasa has done some excellent work around building violations in Egypt and has used, again, animated video to really show alternative approaches to sustainable housing. Or Rosanna, one of our partners in Syria, a fantastic radio station that's trying to do, one example here, virtual elections game. But what that allowed to do was really open up new ways of discussing politics and sharing information around that topic. Or Inky Stories, where there was the hashtag Inasoa, to show really the Me Too campaign in the Tunisian language and draw attention to femicides and these atrocities and tragedies that happen around us. And that was done through a podcast series. So even just from that very short kind of whistle-stop tour through some of these ones from our own partners, we know that we have to push the boundaries and find out what is possible from these platforms. So to take us through a few more examples and go into this in a bit more detail, I'll pass over to Yusuf.
All right. Hi, guys. Click to the next. So my name's Yusuf. I am a journalist. I've been a journalist for about 11 years. I was at CNN International. I was at the Hindustan Times with Nick Dawes. I used to be a foreign correspondent covering a lot of the Middle East and Africa. And I became very disenfranchised with the media landscape. One, I saw a critical lack of diversity in the newsrooms in which I worked and the content in which we did. And two, I saw an obsession with negativity. And both of these themes, a lack of diversity and a lack of answers and solutions to problems in society, meant that the newsrooms I was working in were doing a really bad job of reaching young audiences. I'm going to speak to you about the examples from this database that we've created with IMS. IMS came to me with a pretty sweet deal. They were like, hey, we want to help find examples not from Europe and North America, but from the rest of the world of innovative, amazing journalism that's reaching young audiences, dealing with hard, serious news topics that matter, and we're going to pay you to do it. And I'm like, wow, you're going to give me time to go and find all my competitors and understand what they do and learn from them. I'm going to get paid for this. This is a good deal. I'm going to do this. So that's what we did. It is not a definitive list by any stretch of the imagination. We want to add to it. We want to include examples from people in this room. We want to include more examples from people all over the world. I think this list will grow from 30 to 50 to hundreds and hundreds of examples, and you can think of it as being like an open source innovation lab where you are share-coding examples. What's really cool about the database is you can search via platform. So you can say, show me the coolest stuff that people are doing on YouTube. Show me the coolest stuff people are doing on TikTok. Or you can search by geography. Show me the coolest stuff that's happening in Southern Africa. Show me the coolest stuff that's happening specifically in Kenya. Or you can search by ways that they're monetizing. There's a bunch of different ways that you can search. Show me things that have got ad revenue. Show me things based on how much reach they get. So you can get really specific into finding really good journalism examples of innovations through this kind of study. So actuality is really, really cool. It's a Spanish, I'm going to go through 30, by the way, so I'm going to smash through these, but you'll find way more information online. Actuality is founded by somebody who was working at the Spanish embassy in the US, in New York. And they basically realized that the kinds of formats that were addressing young people, especially around big geopolitical topics, were often like these crazy bar graphs and stuff that you couldn't really engage with. So they went all in on like TikTok and real emerging platforms. The founder actually believes that, and is making big investments in Twitch, thinks Twitch is going to be the future of television, which is a really, really interesting statement to be made. But really, really cool formats, not afraid to make like really serious topics really engaging in a different kind of way. Now, the continent have not got the biggest audience, but they've certainly got a loyal audience. They are working in collaboration with Mail and Guardian for some of their content requirements. They've got like 15,000 subscribers, but those subscribers are not like a Facebook subscriber where you're relying on the algorithm, or a TikTok subscriber, or an Instagram subscriber. They are on WhatsApp, they are on Telegram, they are on Signal. If you think about the old world of one-to-one or one-to-many being like a newsletter subscription, our generation don't really check their emails that much, right? What is email? Like, it's not the fastest way to communicate. We do use messenger platforms, and you're going to see a massive shift over the next few years to messenger being one of the primary ways that you communicate, even communicate with brands. You might book a flight by messaging an airline and be like, hey, I want to fly at this date at this time. And in the same way, they've been able to move what is otherwise quite a conventional PDF-style newsletter into the messenger space. And I think that's a really, really interesting innovation that a lot of us can learn a lot about. La Sira Vasia, again, if I'm going to butcher a couple of these pronunciations, I apologize in advance. This is a Colombian play. They're doing some really interesting stuff, again, off the back of messengers. They're doing some really interesting stuff in the bot space. If we are going to move to an interaction where we're talking to our audience on a one-to-one basis, bots are one way to do that, right? And we've seen these guys do it in an effective way, but I've also seen examples like Quartz. I'm not sure if you guys are familiar with the Quartz app. Really interesting. Basically, you can say, hey, are you interested in this or this? And you're like, oh, I'm interested in this. And it learns you better and starts to deliver you content that is very in line with what you're interested in. It's actually not too difficult to do. This group out of Colombia have done some really good stuff around COVID-19 and the pandemic more broadly. And they're doing a lot of it through these kind of bot services, which I think is really, really interesting. The next one is coming out of India. And oops, that's not India. This is the Logical Indian. And there's a few publications that are playing in this space in India right now. I mean, India, as some of you might know, is the biggest social media market in the world, right? There's more Facebook users in India today than there are in the US. And it's a place that we should all be looking for innovations in the journalism space and specifically in the social publishing space. The Logical Indian are part of a group of companies that are really going hardcore into constructive journalism and solutions-based storytelling. Here's a problem in India, and here's communities that are making it better. What I think they're doing really well is picking the right formats that the algorithms are prioritizing. So right now, if you are playing on Instagram, what would you focus on? Would you focus on pictures? No. Would you focus on video? Yeah. If you're focusing on video, would you focus it on where? On the feed? No, maybe? No? Reels. They're going all in on Reels, and Reels are doing really well for them. They're seeing 100,000 plus views per piece, and they're quite early into this journey. So I think it's a really good example of how to do social in the formats that are resonating. Zaborona is really, really, really cool, really interesting. They are getting into taboo topics. They're getting into stigmas. They're talking about suicide. They're taking what would otherwise often be a print article, maybe an electronic PDF, but they're creating it in a much more engaging way. It's almost like the stories format on a desktop or on a website. You guys, some of you might have been to the Google Stories session this week. Very similar to that, like making the journalism a lot more clickable, a lot more interactive. You're not reading 5,000 words. You're separating it out. And this, for me, is where we start to get to a truly multimedia experience, when you can start to blend photos and videos and GIFs and even VR work all into one medium. So you're not being asked to jump around to different formats. You're getting it all in one place, and it's a really funky way to kind of tell stories. The next example is coming out of Poland. Outriders. I really, really enjoy this. It's really hard to make people give a shit about a water story, like especially young people, right? It's not edgy. It's often not surprising. They've made these articles interactive where for example, as you're scrolling down this article about water shortages, and I think this is a community in Kenya, along the way you get notifications that tell you how much water would have been consumed in the time that you've been reading the article, and how far somebody would have had to walk in this community to get the water. And I love this, the idea that the content is so dynamic that it is responding to the pace at which you are reading it and giving you real-time data based on your amount of time spent on the article. I haven't seen many products that are that dynamic, that are actually engaging with your user experience and the pace at which you're consuming content. DW, my friends up the front from Bonn, Germany. Deutsche Welle have approached the African continent in a very unique way, right? So there's lots of players that are trying to cover the African continent. I think the big ones are probably CGTN, the Chinese. AJ Plus have got a big presence. BBC to some extent. Deutsche Welle decided they're going to train young people to do it. And I am all in for this. I mean, this is something I'm personally very passionate about. They took 13 to 17-year-olds, trained them up how to tell stories, and those kids, those young people, are the face of the stories. You've got 15-year-olds in Malawi talking about healthcare services, and they're talking about it in really cool ways. I think it could be cooler, like it's still very much a broadcast format, right? And I think there's a space to say, okay, how would you tell this? Because you certainly you wouldn't tell it like a broadcaster, but it's a step in the right direction. It's putting the mic in the hands of those that are often marginalized, that are often not heard, and Fresh Voices is really effective. Young people speaking to other young people. And that project's called Girls Off Mute. Next, we've got a fact-checking exercise. Africa Check, based out of Johannesburg. How do we fight fake news and false information, right? There's this ongoing discussion. Is it the platform's responsibility? Partially, but I don't know if I want Zuckerberg to be the gatekeeper of all information, and I don't think they can do it at the scale. Is it the media organizations? Partially. At the end of the day, we've got to train audiences how to be the first barrier to fight false information, and especially on WhatsApp, right? WhatsApp is this cesspit of fake news, right? And it spreads so quickly, and it's so hard to measure. They are coming up with really innovative audio series and other ways of disseminating media literacy and fact-checking advice so that you think before you share, right? Here's 5 questions that you should ask yourself before you share something on WhatsApp. So coming up with funky explainer formats in audio that enable young people to be the first frontline heroes that are fighting fake news and false information is something I think we all need to be getting involved in. Katira is something that's looking specifically at animated stories, explainer stories, taking really serious topics of fatherhood and motherhood and telling them in a really engaging way. Often, some of these stories around parenting and etc. are really difficult to visualize, and I think they're doing a really solid job of doing that using animations and illustrations in quite a cool way. The next example is actually a COVID example, and it comes out of South Africa. How cool is this session, right? That we're focusing on non-Europe, non-North America. Food from Zanzi was basically like a father-son duo that were able to produce content providing critical information around COVID-19 in South Africa's 11 official languages. And they were able to broadcast these as podcasts, as audio messages, but they took it a step further. I'm really interested in this idea of derivative content strategies, which is how you take one piece of content and distribute it in as many different ways as possible. And in addition to the audio experience, they were able to produce a comic book, which is highly engaging with young audiences, again, spreading really important information around social distancing and information around COVID-19 to some of South Africa's most rural communities with a project that they called Captain Stay Safe. Really, 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 really valuable experience. Kloop are doing some cool things. They're from Kyrgyzstan. They are producing amazing data journalism. They're producing really good investigative journalism. They're looking at femicides. They're looking at gender-based violence. Again, not afraid to get a little bit abstract and unconventional in the way that they visualize these things, working with really cool comic artists, working with really good illustrators to bring these otherwise visually impossible stories to life in ways that I haven't really seen before. The next one I think is really interesting, Al-Hud. As you know, in many parts of the world, especially in the Middle East, in the absence of independent, great journalism, it's often the satirical and comedians that are informing us. I mean, even in Western audiences, The Daily Show with Trevor Noah is a place where a lot of young people get their news. And I think Al-Hud is doing a good job of creating what they call organized gossip, but essentially creating satirical content that helps explain the Middle East to young audiences in a really cool way. Some of you guys might know Gapminder. Gapminder did a really cool project. They basically looked at people in basically every country in the world to submit 30,000 photographs. Photographs of basic things in their lives. Show me your toothbrush. Show me your chair. Show me your bed. And you basically create like a spectrum of wealth. And what was really, really interesting about this project when you look at it is if you look at somebody in a certain social economic class in China and you compare them to the same social economic class in Ethiopia, what you'll find is a lot of the elements in their lives, when you look at the pictures, are actually really similar. The kind of dining room table they have is really similar. The type of materials that their plates and cups are made out of is really similar. And it just it's a real leveler in terms of where people are on the social economic curve and how similar their lives are, even if they're in completely different parts of the world. I love this next example. It's from Johnny Miller. South Africa's Gini coefficient, the difference between the rich and the poor, makes it the most unequal country in the world. And when you're on the ground, by show of hands, anyone been to South Africa? Yeah, a handful of you. You should go. It's a great holiday, everybody. Awesome. Come stay with my family, although I'm not there at the moment. South Africa is really sometimes difficult to see the inequality on the ground, right? You can go on holiday to Cape Town, and it looks like Disneyland. It's like a really sanitized part of Western Europe. But raise that camera up into the sky, and you really get a sense of the inequality, the gross injustices, the swimming pools meeting urban populations living in very close proximity. People with huge golf courses beside communities where 50 to 100 people are sharing a toilet without a door. Johnny Miller has done some amazing work that really went viral with young audiences on social media, simply getting up over the skies and giving us that picture of inequality. And I think this is where drone journalism is so effective to tell a story that would otherwise be really difficult to tell. Talk Up Youth, I met the founder a few weeks ago, actually, in Dubai, but this is a Jamaican organization, and they are making content for young audiences, but this is an important lesson. If you're going to make content for young audiences, you need young producers and journalists and creators. Their team are all under the age of 25, right? So those are their producers, those are their editors, those are their presenters, and that's why for Jamaican youth, they're able to touch subjects like, menstruation and topics that matter, body positivity, but topics that matter to young people. But if you had a really old team that were delivering that or creating that radio package, you'd never get access to those kinds of stories. So have a young newsroom, create stories for young people. It sounds simple, but you'd be surprised how little it happens. Kashmir Unheard is, again, right down my alleyway, citizen journalism, empowering communities to tell their own stories with mobile devices. Really important project, right? I mean, a lot of you are familiar with the Indian media landscape right now. Really difficult to get access to the stories that matter in places like Kashmir, and the ability to empower impactful journalism on the ground by citizens, of course, fact-checked and verified, is a really important service that they're providing. Intifada, you heard a little bit about it up the top. I think they were really strong off the back of the hashtag Me Too movement. They had some really interesting pieces around sexual harassment, abuse, even murder. They ran with the hashtag her name is and created a really engaging and interactive podcast. And I think this is another example of where formats are not in isolation anymore, where you can have a podcast that's surrounded by text, that's surrounded by photos, and it's all living in this mixed media space. And it's effectively, the opportunity to get that information in various different formats, however you prefer to consume. The next one is a US example, but I really like these guys. Planet Money, if you're not following them on TikTok, I think it's my favorite TikTok account right now. Planet Money are doing personal finance stuff. They're helping to explain global economies. The cool thing about them, and it's that they are using the visual storytelling grammar and language of TikTok, right? They're using the tools. They're drawing onto their stuff. They're using which news publication in the world is going to run with text like that on their screen that's like hand-drawn and like really sloppy? And that's exactly, apart from the language and it actually being really good, useful content, it just feels native. Like you have to feel native to the platform. I was on BBC News' TikTok today. They've got 20,000 subscribers. What a joke. Honestly, it's embarrassing. Sorry, BBC, but it is. This is cool, and it's cool because it's native and because it makes sense on the platform. I like this. Sujag is when I went to journalism school, I learned a lot about gonzo journalism and Hunter S. Thompson and, going off and finding these zany stories. And Sujag does exactly that. They're in Pakistan, and they'll get on the back of a motorbike and mission off to a community and go and find stories and adventures that they never expected to find. And I love this. This is like the intersection of journalism and like travel influencer stories. And it's engaging and it's entertaining and you fall in love with the characters. And yes, it's presenter-led and potentially a little bit personality-driven. But it works really, really well. Like this is, in this instance, the image you're looking at now is a father-daughter duo heading around telling stories. And I think there's something so cool about that, and it's so real and raw. What's new as a BBC product? It is designed for 11 to 16-year-olds, and it's looking at all kinds of stories on the African continent. Very like explainer-led journalism, relatively easy to understand. I think that's the good bits. I think it still is very much in a TV format in terms of studio-led and those kinds of things. But it is cool to see traditional media that are now starting to create packages and entire formats for young audiences. You heard a little bit about Rosanna FM up top. Gamifying journalism is a really exciting direction to head in. I was speaking to a couple colleagues yesterday and saying everybody loves a good story, especially if you can be a part of that story, right? And in the context of this, a lot of Syrians that have left Syria are now often have a feeling that the elections that take place in Syria are not authentic, they're not legitimate. So they've created a game where you can have a legitimate voting election. They're based in Paris out of a secret location. Just a really good example of gamifying journalism in an interesting way. Quint are an Indian media publication. You can think of Quint as like the AJ Plus, Al Jazeera Plus, or the Now This maybe of India. They are really good at explainer journalism. They're really good at the kind of journalism that in a short amount of time can articulate stuff really quickly. Again, I'm seeing a lot of a trend moving towards illustrative, graphic novel type journalism to visualize stories around corruption, to visualize things that are often really, really difficult to visualize. So definitely worth checking out. Again, there's so much more information on our database around each of these partners. 444 is really cool. They're Hungarian, they're independent. They do really cool stuff around the LGBTQI+ community, something that, especially in that region, traditional media do a really bad job, if any, of reporting on. Transgender stories, these kinds of stories, they really are putting a spotlight on unheard voices, and that alone is a really effective way to reach young audiences. These are things that we care about, right? We care about human rights, we care about, we have friends that are in the LGBT community, or we are ourselves, and if you can be that news organization who is bringing light to those stories in a landscape where people aren't, you'll find yourself a really effective niche very quickly. NOS Stories is from the Netherlands. They're based in Hilversum in the Netherlands. Really cool. This is an example of traditional media that are now breaking into new media formats, launching TikTok campaigns, especially dealing with misinformation around the war in Ukraine right now, helping us separate real from fake. Mar Damasur, you must have heard a lot about in many sessions at this conference, out of Egypt, creating cool animations to help tell complex stories around human rights abuses, social development campaigns, education, criticizing the government in a very smart way where it's again, quite entertaining to watch. I love the next example. This is Megaphone. Megaphone are in Morocco. They're doing mobile journalism, but they're doing it in a very cool format. They're doing explainer journalism where they're cropping out the presenter, and it's often presenter-led into little circles. The presenter is driving the story forward, but is basically the link between verified user-generated content. So it's a really clever way to go from singular examples of UGC and stitch it together into a broader narrative and create a kind of format or brand around that. Jumping back into India, Brute India are doing really well, especially on Snapchat. They figured out how to do a few things. One, they figured out how to curate UGC on a daily basis. On Snap, for example, there's, I think, 4 billion snaps that are created every day, and they are able to curate these into what's happening in the world in 31 snaps. But they're also doing some really good individual pieces. What they've done well here, again, is they've gone in for vertical. They're not trying to take landscape content and make it vertical, and they've gone in for issues that young people care about. They're looking at edgy topics like child marriage and how Indian communities are dealing with those dynamics in a really, really cool way. Jumping over to Belarus, we've got City Dog. Again, doing really cool mixed media stuff. What's really cool about this is all of their content is filmed on mobile phones. They're using Samsung Galaxies, and that's how they're capturing their content. It's a good example for developmental organizations, for media organizations, that you don't need a budget to race into video production, right? So many of these, especially this team, are working entirely with mobile phones. There's no capital, there's no CapEx budget that they need to break into to suddenly scale video production. They're able to do it with what's in their pocket. We all have a Ferrari in our pockets, but most of us are driving it in first gear. La Nación, again, these guys are out of Argentina. We're seeing a huge amount of organic reach at the moment on TikTok, right? Young people are engaging on that platform. You don't have to pay to reach large audiences. They are working with TikTok influencers. They're finding people who have large audiences and creating formats for those individuals to deliver news to young people. This makes sense. Like, find people who are kicking ass on a platform and work with them. Why try and reinvent the wheel when there's people that are already doing amazing stuff in this space? And Daraj, coming out for the Arabic-speaking world, doing really cool explainer journalism. What's cool about this is making really difficult geopolitical topics, current affairs, really, really easy to understand and relevant to young people, putting in a language that makes sense, dynamic timelines, that kind of stuff. I'm now going to cross over. Oh, and by the way, please use the hashtag #GoodJournalism if you've got an example of an innovative program that you're working on, because we would love to feature you in the database.
Thanks so much, Yusuf. While Yusuf catches his breath, I hope that sort of whistle-stop tour through some of those inspiring examples has helped frame a little bit what we're trying to achieve here. And on that note, what you'll see, one of the key points that we're trying to make is that so often we've showcased examples from The Guardian, the BBC, New York Times. The whole endeavour here is to shift that gaze so that we can see what is going on in the global south and really empower, in fact, those media to share between themselves and actually see how this can be done, like local to local contexts. And on that note, Henrik, just we're moving forward now, not only just to have the database, but to think about how to do training and how to do that in kind of in new ways. But if you could just tell us a little bit very briefly, because we're cracking on with time, that'd be great. Thanks, Henrik.
I will. Hi, I'm Henrik from and I've been with the IMS for the last 13 years. And this will not be at the same speed of like what you did, so I'll cut down in what I'm saying, and then give the word back to Yusuf. But just to say that we work as a media development organization, and we've been working primarily in countries where you have armed conflict, where you have a humanitarian crisis, or authoritarian rule. So that means that we have a lot of challenges. And so far, like exactly what Claire was saying, we have been working with examples of the Western world. How did The Guardian do it? How did the BBC do it? I work as an advisor, and then telling our partners you should do it like that. But what happened? Actually, people in the global south are simply running away from these traditional media. And that was what we wanted to catch up on. We have, these are the countries that we're working in. So as you can see, it's a belt here, and almost all of these countries are somehow involved in a conflict, are somehow having really a tough time in what they're doing, often a very strict religious environment there also. So of course there are things we have to be careful about, also just instead of just going like what young people in, again, Western Europe are doing. So all of these examples that you could see Yusuf coming up with are done very culture sensitive and at the same time finding new ways. And I think some of the, if we say, what is it that categorize them, all of them is that they are really involving their audiences, that they are going the new ways. So we're really happy about that. This is just to you could say, okay, the partners we work with win a lot of awards, but we had to realize that if you take all these countries, another thing is we sit up here and we are all middle-aged in Europe. We are getting older and older, but in the countries we want to work, that's where the young people are. And if we want our partners to really catch their audience, which is young, then we need to do new things from what we have done. So we then decided to bring in #OurStories, and I think you should talk a little bit. You are a very humble person, Yusuf. I think I'm the first one who has said that.
Definitely.
Yes, but we also should hear a little bit about why is it #OurStories who have come in here, because we think they have done a phenomenal job, like to find things that can inspire all of us. This is not stealing, this is getting inspired. It's all there, out there. It's to find someone who can find what's actually being the next thing. So far we have had 12 modules in a training curriculum that we've been working with and been training in traditional journalism for all our partners. Now what we want to do is to get hold of how they can reach the young audiences. We're gonna, after this, we're gonna have a series of workshops where you're also very welcome to take part in those, to share knowledge from south to south, you can say, and then get the best out of that. And I guess thinking about the engagement, which you have also been very strong in. And then we have actually, when we have this other module, we call it Engaging Young Audiences. And it's actually, you could say that we might be a little bit afraid coming out with this respectable, out of Scandinavian traditional way of looking at public interest journalism. And the task we gave to #OurStories was also we need to have the combination. How can we both have public interest stories, like you could see that Yusuf was presenting, but told in a way that it's the young people who actually want to use it and be involved in this. So that's a quite difficult task. We have over 42 now examples in the database that we'll put up the website where you can find it, and divide it like how Yusuf said. but we would also love you to give us examples of what you think could be in there, so we get this best practice from everywhere.
Thanks, Henrik, that's brilliant. You can tell, even just from doing this project, Yusuf, I think it's fair to say, as we've gone along, we've realised the complexities and the nuances of the challenge. Just things like in Khmer language, they can mix sometimes Latin with English. You can't search in the same way that we might do if we're just doing English. So it's really important that we have a multicultural, multi-gender, multi-regional approach to this if we're genuinely going to understand what is emerging out of the Global South in an impactful way. Ultimately, of course, to reach new audiences with hard-hitting stories and drive better societies, which is our kind of main mission. I'll pass back to you now, Yusuf. What we wanted to really start to bring the energy towards us all going away with a very clear message here was to then sort of really understand what the message is to those of us who are either in media development or in news organisations from all of the experience that Yusuf's kind of developed over these last few years with a huge team, I might add, around the globe. Kind of these key secrets to success with your social media content. And don't move anywhere because we will be finishing with an amazing wrap.
Yeah, it's true. Thank you so much. Okay, so this is the stuff. I was passionate about the 30 examples that we showcased, but I'm even more passionate about the work that we do. So I run a company called #OurStories with my wife and co-founder, Yusuf Omar. We started the pandemic with 3 staff. Today, we're 110. We've grown very, very quickly. And I want to share with you some I love this conference. I love the International Journalism Festival. But I think what a lot of people crave is practical things that they can take away, right? Lessons that you can implement in your newsroom that's going to change your stories and the way you format for young people. So I'm going to share with you some very practical examples at the end, tangible lessons that you can apply to your content creation process. Boom. All right. So when you look at the media landscape right now, this is a little iceberg. The traditional media are only taking the viral videos that bubble to the top of the social media timelines, and they're putting that on the news, right? It's the really funny stuff, like the Chewbacca mum. Anyone remember Chewbacca mum? It's the really fucked up stuff, like the terror attacks. But below that are billions of people with mobile devices, with amazing stories to be told. Incredible, incredible stories. But they don't know how to tell a story. They don't know how to amplify or elevate their voice. We realized if we could empower those people with a few tools, with a few skills, with a few journalistic principles, we could suddenly discover way more content. We could create a more diverse media landscape. We could really find solutions around the world. So that was the idea. And initially, my co-founder and I went around the world to almost 100 countries. We went to, and actually in Denmark, in your country, I gave a speech and I said to the media people, I said, hey, this is the idea. Train communities to tell their own stories and fact check and verify it, and we can access new content. And the editors of the BBC, some of which are at this conference, I met some of them outside, they laughed at us. They laughed at us. They said, we'd rather die than do what you do. But it's not journalism. Journalism is, this is what they said.
But this isn't journalism. I would die rather than do it. I don't want to watch it either. Curating selfies isn't journalism.
Nick Robinson, political editor of the BBC. Curating selfies is not journalism. Jump forward to today, and the information that we're getting out of the war in Ukraine is from Zelensky with his mobile phone, selfie style, walking around the streets. Right? So there was a huge opportunity to tell stories from communities themselves with journalism in place, with fact-checking and verification happening. So that's the opportunity we saw. And we come out of those meetings basically saying, wow, they don't get it. They don't get it. Like, we can do this. So we did it ourselves. Started up training communities around the world, started creating tools to help those communities tell their own stories, and jump forward to today. We've got 5 million subscribers. We reached 1 billion views last year. Our tools have been used by over 20 million people, have opened up their camera and used our tools, and we produce all of these amazing shows. And these are all about people creating positive change. And you're here at this session to learn about how to create innovative journalism around real stories that are going to reach young audiences. Do you know how young our audience are? 70% of them are aged 13 to 24. 60% of them are female. We have a very young audience of young women around the world that care about the stories that we do. We have a gun violence show, we have a mental health show, we have a show about sex education, we have 2 shows in India, we have a show that celebrates diversity, we have a show about entrepreneurship, we have a show about environmentalism. We're really good at reaching young audiences. So, as I promised, practical tips for how to reach young audiences. 1, go video, right? According to Cisco, 80% of the world internet's traffic is made up of video. This is the primary way that we engage with content. We watch video. Algorithms prioritize video on all of the social media platforms. Even Instagram, which was historically a photo sharing app, have now said, hey, we're all in on video. So whatever you're doing, whatever your strategy is, you need video. I don't care if you're a newspaper or a radio station, you need a video element if you're going to reach young audiences. If you're doing video, you have to survive the first second. You have to survive the first second. I would go as far as to say you have to survive the first fraction of a second. My generation have got thumbs that are too ready to swipe on, right? We didn't come to your page to see your story. We came across it on our feed. We came across it on our Instagram Reels. You have a fraction of a second to grab my attention in the opening frame. Do not show me a logo of your company. Do not start with a presenter saying, today we're going to Ukraine to find out. Go straight into the most controversial, most emotional, most visually stimulating element and put it right up the top of your story. Survive the first second. This is an example from Ukraine.
2 months ago, all I was thinking and wanting was Balenciaga bag. Right now, I just want peace. I just want my family safe. I was born in Odessa and I live there. At 5 o'clock, my mom called me. I was sleeping at my apartment and she was like, Valerie, I'm coming for you. The war started. I opened the news and there were bombs. I realized that it's my reality right now and that I need to pack immediately. My hands...
Okay, survive the first second. If I started this story with, even if I started with her telling me how terrible the existence is right now, I don't know if a lot of people would be able to stop and watch that. They needed to start with something relatable, something TikTok-y, something that shows her normal life that I can relate to. I'm like, oh, this doesn't look like I'm going to have a really depressing day if I watch this, and then ease them into the content. The second idea is create relatable content, right? So relatable often means young people, but it also often means showing me the parts of the story that don't necessarily make the cut in traditional media. Show me the everyday stuff. Show me the everyday parts of people's lives. I have seen countless videos from media organizations looking at the bomb shelters around Ukraine, right? But it's often presenter-led. It's in the context of, look how bad people's lives are down here. What about relatable content from the perspective of a young person, showing me where they're sleeping, where they're eating, how they're spending their time, what games they're playing, how they're staying engaged, how they're trying to get access to internet. Basic relatable stuff that I can engage with.
I'm living in a bomb shelter with my family, dad and mother.
Я вообще живу в Киеве, но я случайно захотела как-то приехать к своим родителям на 2 дня в Чернигов. Случилось так, что я просыпаюсь, и моя мама залетает ко мне в комнате, такая: Лера, типа, война там. Мне 20 лет, и я вижу, как по городу катаются танки. Я вижу, как люди убегают в бомбоубежище. Огромные очередя в супермаркетах. Первый день мы никуда не прятались, мы не прятались.
And even the visual storytelling grammar of that, like she's sitting on the floor with her leg up, it's not formal, it's not like this like 16:9 really rigid interview format. It's human and real. Like, I was saying this to a few colleagues yesterday. We moved to digital media formats or platforms, but we kept the same formats. We kept the same visual storytelling grammar. We kept the same expectations of everything being on rule of thirds and people not looking at the camera but looking off camera. Why? It doesn't make sense to me. Like, this content, in terms of its relatability, it looks like a FaceTime call. It looks like you're talking to a friend. That's the level. And that's really important because on social media platforms, you're often coming off the back of a friend's content. If I'm watching Instagram stories, I'm watching my friend Sanche's story, and then I might be coming into your news story. And if that is too big of a departure, if the format is too radically different to what my friend's content looks like, I might swipe away. It might look like an ad. So trying to keep it native, trying to keep it in that same visual storytelling language, and that means fundamentally changing the way we think about shooting, editing, structuring our narratives, everything. The third is amplifying marginalized communities, right? It's a huge opportunity, and again, my first 3 examples are from Ukraine, looking at who are the most marginalized communities in that environment, right? And often, when people were trying to leave this conflict, Black Africans had a really difficult time, and being able to train those communities to tell their own stories.
A Ukrainian was like, why should a Black enter? I said, do you mean to tell me that just Ukrainians are getting on this bus? And she said, yes, just Ukrainians. And we all started crying, that what do we do? I am from Nigeria. I graduated from high school with the goal of studying medicine. That's the sole purpose why I came to Ukraine. Thursday, I got a call.
So such a great potential, right? To be able to empower communities to tell their own stories. And when we say which communities are we going to empower, look for the most marginalized. Look for those really unheard voices. You are in a very crowded social media timeline with a lot of stuff that all looks the same. You've got to find that unique story. You've got to find that unique perspective. You've got to find that voice that hasn't been heard before. The next one is to build suspense into your narratives. When you look at social media platforms today, one of the major signals that they're looking at to define whether they're going to prioritize it on social media timelines is not the views, because views can be manipulated. I can put a really edgy, clickbaity photo at the top of my video, and I can get a view. I can get somebody to watch for a second. But a 1-second view doesn't do any favors to the social media platform. They want people to stay on their apps and platforms for as long as possible because they can serve them more ads. So we have to be thinking in terms of our video structures. How do we build suspense into the narrative to keep young people watching for as long as possible? And this has been a gradual journey for us over the last 4 years. When we started, we had about a 20-second average watch time. Then we got to 30, 45, 1. Now I think we're at about 1 minute 30 average watch time. The average consumer watches about 1 minute 30, which is really cool because our videos are 3 minutes. So they're watching half the video on average, which means other people are obviously getting to the end. To do that, you have to structure your stories for suspense. The whole way. You can't give it away up the top. You can't top load all of the information, because then you're like, oh, I understand the story, I can move on to the next story. You need to keep going, ba-da-dum, ba-da-bum, ba-dum, but wait, there's more, ba-da-bum, ba-da-bum. And that starts with a really suspenseful introduction. You'll remember Sheikh Jarrah in Jerusalem, Palestinian communities in Jerusalem being removed from their homes not too long ago. And this was a piece that was captured.
I'm a journalist! I'm a journalist! Don't touch me! Don't touch me! I'm a journalist! No!
Right? So you don't know what's going to happen to that young woman. You just know she's being pulled away by an IDF soldier. Where is she going? What's going to happen next? I need to keep watching to find out. And you can achieve this in so many ways. If we're working with the LGBTQI community and somebody's getting top surgery, they're getting their breasts removed, start the story with, hey, in 2 weeks' time, I'm going to get surgery. Follow me on this journey. You're in. You've got to keep watching to see what's going to happen at the end of that story. It's really different to how we package video for television, right? Which is voiceover, interview, Yusuf Omar, Pruja, right? It's a totally different format. And highlight youth. If we're trying to do stories for young people, feature young people in the stories. I'm not only one of the oldest people in our newsroom, but I'm also too old for our newsroom to feature in the stories anymore. We feature young people talking about things that matter. This was during the bombing of Gaza, and we were able to feature a young person telling stories, and the story starts on his rooftop.
Oh, look for it. Oh my God, I'm very worried. Oh my God, guys, the occupation bombed Gaza right now. I want to show you what is happening in Gaza. Today, Gaza is known as the biggest open-air prison in the world. Israel controls our borders.
The next advice I have for you is keep it real and keep it raw. As a generation, we've experienced false information, we've experienced fake news. Often, the more polished the edit is, the more polished the shots are, the more contrived the video looks, the more manipulated the video looks. Where possible, get rid of the gimbal, get rid of the tripod, get rid of the microphones and lights and all of the equipment. Just keep it real and raw. We have created content for young audiences, and we've created some of them with a budget of $100,000, and we've created some with a budget of $10. The $10 stuff is every time done better. Every single time. The content that we produce when we work with television stations in the US like NBC, it does not perform as well as the stuff that we produce using mobile phones. It is incredible. Production values are not going to win young audiences around innovative journalism. It just doesn't work that way. Keep it real and keep it raw.
Doctor, artist,
Civil officer.
software engineer,
Lawyer. Teacher.
I want to be a journalist. I want to be a journalist.
We're not supposed to use social media. Our elders don't allow us to use.
We're not allowed to do what we want to do because it comes under our family's name, because it says it's so-and-so's daughter, so-and-so's granddaughter. They're not allowed to do what we want to do. Boys, they're given more freedom than the girls.
Right? So keep it real, keep it raw. The movement is happening there. The shots are silhouetted. The audio is not great. No one gives a shit. We're the YouTube generation. We want real, raw, engaging storytelling. As a final idea, we are about, you'll see me walking around this town and I'm wearing, I sometimes look like I'm blind. I'm wearing these big black glasses. And these glasses are augmented reality glasses. I'm layering the internet onto the world. I'm seeing anything from directions of where I want to go to stories that I want to tell around the city. I'm constantly wearing glasses. We are about to experience an enormous transition in the digital media landscape. You've all heard the word Web3 floating around. You've all heard the word metaverse. And there's a lot of BS around these ideas. But the truth is, over the next 8 years, everyone in this room, your primary input technology is going to become the camera. And your primary device that you're going to use is probably going to be a computer on your face. We're going to move away from the mobile phone. All of us need to be making really critical investments in this space through augmented reality, virtual reality, immersive storytelling. Maybe it's not 100% here today. Maybe there's not a huge audience there today. I would argue there is. I'd say there's millions of people that are using AR today. But we need to make innovations in this space because the leaps that we're taking are very big. The jump from traditional media to digital was not so big. A newspaper online and a newspaper in print, same shit. Taking video from TV and putting it on YouTube, very similar. This jump is a very, very big jump. And if we are going to create impactful journalism that's relevant to young audiences around the world, and we're going to be relevant as individual storytellers and as media organizations in the next 8 years, there's really, really big investments that we need to make. We've already started doing that. We've started creating shows, 5 minutes, not just with augmented reality, but also with wearable storytelling. We've created shows that are told entirely through people's eyes. I'm going to skip this. We'd love to know about your innovations, sharing examples of your work. We want to introduce you and include you in the database. Now, if you need a summary of the 30 newsrooms that I mentioned earlier as part of this amazing IMS database, my team have created a wrap. Again, thinking about different formats and how to package stuff differently, we've created a wrap that articulates some of the innovations that you've just heard about. So here is the wrap.
Actuality, Your news in 1 minute. The content and digital distribution is no gimmick. La CIA, Vacia, Politica, AI bots. The logical Indian inspiring youth on the spot. Zabarona, photo quota meant to break down taboos. Outriders turning social media into website views. Deja Vella handing the mic to the African kids, while Africa check make sure that the news is accurate. Katira using satire to open discourse. Through forums, Unzi captains stay safe, keep the kids all informed. Klupa network of journals highlight issues at large. I'll hear dude using humor to say the things others can't. Getminded.org, take a journey down the wealth line. Unequal scenes will show disparity from a bird's eye view. Talk up a place for youngsters to speak. Kashmir unheard, spread the word. Survivors are not weak. Intifada, immersive, female stories they tell. Planet Money helping us to better manage our wealth. Sujaj, hear it first from the back of a bike. What's new? They gonna tell you in the way that kids like. Rosanna FM, virtual elections for the vote list. The Quint, graphic novels that show some systems are broken. 444, you're free to love who you choose. Not stories, fact checking behind the TikTok views. Matter Massa using art to spread the news. Megaphone, UGC, shedding light on abuse. Brew India, personal stories on Snap. The City Dog bringing forgotten folk tales back. La Nation bringing influence, expanding reach. The Raj, creative approaches to the way that they teach.
Awesome, thank you. New voices, new formats. Thank you very much for your attention and a big round of applause.